126th U.S. Open at Shinnecock Hills wraps up a week of memories. I'm Joe Shaw. This is 27 Speaks Behind the Headlines. This is our weekly podcast where we take a look at what happened in the news this week in the Express News Group newspapers, which is the Southampton Press, the East Hampton Press, the Sag Harbor Express, the website 27east.com, and Express Magazine. I'm Joe Shaw. I'm a consulting editor at the Express News Group. Joining me today are staff writers Dan Stark, Jack Motz, Cailin Riley, and features editor Michelle Trauring. We are going to start with Cailin Riley, who spent just a miserable week reporting on the U.S. Open. You and Mike Wright were at Shinnecock Hills every day, I think, right? Including the practice rounds. You guys did some amazing work on social media, captured a lot of great stories. It was quite a memorable week, wasn't it? It was a heck of a tournament.
Oh my God, it was so much fun. It was one of the best work weeks of my career, and I've been doing this a while, so that says something. Yeah, it was great.
What was your favorite part?
This sounds insane, but my favorite part was getting up at 1:30 in the morning and riding around with the maintenance guys and checking out the work that they do. I should not be starting a sentence saying my favorite part was getting up at 1:30 in the morning, but that was my favorite part. I like unsung heroes. Those guys are the unsung heroes of the whole tournament.
It was really the story behind the story, right? That they are so important that week, and they very rarely get their moment in the spotlight. I'll tell you, getting up early, you got that amazing photo of the sunrise when those guys were working. Was an incredible sunrise, and they noticed it and sort of saw it as a good omen. They had a good week, didn't they? Because the last couple of U.S. Opens at Shinnecock Hills, the conditions have regularly been a big part of the story. This time around, that was less so. It was about wind, but the conditions on the course were terrific this time around.
Yeah, I mean, the wind is a signature of the golf course, and so depending on what it does, it has a huge impact on the way the course plays. And the wind, there's a lot they have to manage with the wind. So it's sandy soil, so when it's very windy, it dries out fast. And then the USGA, they call all the shots, the USGA, and the maintenance team is there to kind of execute their plan. And there's a lot that goes into it because this is our national championship. So you want the score to be right around par. And in order for that to happen, there's things that you do on the course maintenance, and it's a tricky balance between making sure that the course is playing hard enough to challenge the world's best players, but also isn't being overly punitive. And, they've had issues with that in the past. But this year, I think everyone agreed that they did a great job. And it was a really nice moment at the end of the tournament on the 18th green. Again, for me, because this is the local paper, you see the winner, Wyndham Clark, hoist the trophy, and that's a great moment for him. But for me, the best moment on the 18th green was seeing course superintendent John Jennings receive special recognition from the USGA, and they handed him this really nice silver platter, just recognizing him for all his achievements. And he's just a consummate professional, super nice guy. I can't say enough about him. I've gotten to know him over the years. He was there for the Open in 2018 as well. He's so dedicated to his job. And it was really nice to see him hoist a trophy, and with his maintenance team around him as well. Really well deserved. He's retiring in December, so it was a really nice send-off for him.
The crowd got a bit of criticism in the days after the U.S. Open ended. They were pretty rough on Wyndham Clark, weren't they? You were there. Was it as bad as it looked on TV?
Yeah, kind of. So when I was there, I was sitting in one of the grandstands by the 11th hole, where you can kind of see the guys tee off on 11, putt on 11. You get a kind of good vantage point. And I sat down it was Father's Day, Sunday. So I sat down next to these guys. Now, I thought they knew each other. There was a 7-year-old boy and a 17-year-old boy, and the way they were interacting, I was like, oh, these guys know each other. Turns out they don't. The 7-year-old was absolutely adorable. He was so into it. He was listening along on his American Express headset. But let me tell you, this kid really wanted Wyndham Clark to lose, and he was pretty outspoken about it. He made me laugh, just the fact that he was 7 and he cared so much about golf, and then the kid he was sitting next to was a 17-year-old high school senior from New Jersey who's the captain of his high school golf team, and it was very cute seeing the two of them not know each other at all, and they were, like, chatting and yucking it up and showing each other golf videos, but yeah, this little kid was like, "I hope Wyndham Clark gets a quintuple bogey on this hole, and there's a playoff for 3 people, and he loses," and I don't know. I mean, listen, apparently Wyndham Clark smashed, like, a historic wicker locker at Oakmont after
Mhm.
he didn't make the cut in some tournament, and I guess people haven't liked him since then. It seems like the guy's been on an apology tour that apparently he's still touring on that tour because people still didn't want him to win, but, you know who you might wanna feel worse for than him is Sam Burns, who would have forced a playoff hole if he had made a birdie putt on 18 that was, I would say, about that short of going in the hole.
Yeah, that was a rough one to
That was
see.
rough.
And
That's
Wyndham
the
Clark
game.
actually was very gracious in winning, and he made reference to that and even made reference to the crowd. You spent a lot of the week telling the local stories. What were some of those stories that you and Michael Wright told that talked about the tournament has such a local feel because of so many people from the region who are involved in it as volunteers and as participants and getting the course ready? You already spoke about that. What were some of the other local stories?
So I like golf, but I don't play. Mike handles the stuff that someone who plays golf needs to know. So he did an excellent story about some of the local guys that caddy at Shinnecock that picked up a bag for the tournament. You know, some of these guys don't have a regular caddy, or maybe they qualified to get in. The cost of flying a caddy over is pricey, so they get someone from the club. I mean, these guys know this course better than anyone. So there were a bunch of local caddies had that got to caddy in the tournament. So he interviewed them, spoke to them, including, you know, guys like Tim Fox, who Mike went to high school with, Southampton guy. So that was a great story. I wrote a story about Seneca Bowen's son, Xavier Bowen. He is a middle school student at Tuckahoe, and he plays on the JV golf team. He got to be a standard bearer for the week. Seneca Bowen is the treasurer of the Shinnecock Council of Trustees, the Shinnecock Nation Council of Trustees. So, you know, for me, I was very interested in writing about local connections and the connection with the Shinnecock Nation because there's a lot of history there. The club has had its ups and downs in their relationship with the nation. It's definitely very much improved. The Shinnecock Nation did a land acknowledgement there on Monday. There's also a fabulous documentary by the Golf Channel. It's called The Land We Share. It's about an hour long, and it really focuses on all that history and how things have evolved with the Shinnecock Nation and the golf club. And it's a really good, and I feel very fair look at how that relationship has gone, the ups and the downs. I highly recommend it. If you don't have the Golf Channel, you can go on YouTube and watch it. And Matt Smith, who's the assistant superintendent, course superintendent at Shinnecock, and I wrote a really big feature story about him as well. I rode around with him the morning I got up at 1:30 a.m. and he was very gracious and showing me around. And his uncle is Peter Smith, who was the longtime course superintendent there. So it was really, really, really cool listening to him tell me his whole story of how he ended up coming to Shinnecock and why it matters so much to him. And, you know, those were the kind of stories I was interested in and wrote, and it was really rewarding writing them.
Yeah, you and Michael Wright did such an amazing job this week of telling all of those local stories. And the Shinnecock Nation was very much a big part of our coverage. And I think that's appropriate. It was a great week. You did a great job. So did Michael Wright. I'm very proud of it. And folks should go to 27east.com and read some of those stories. Check out your social media postings, which were awesome and very entertaining.
The food
Uh,
concession stand reviews were really fun and really funny, and we pulled in some special guests for them, and I'll tell you what, I got a lot of feedback on those, almost to the point that I was like, "But did you read the stories I wrote too, or were you just interested in, like, finding out which hot dogs were the best?"
A lot to talk about with the Open. You did such a great job, you and Mike. So thank you for that, Cailin.
Thanks. It was
Take
great.
a break this week because it's only the 4th of July issue now. So
There's no breaks, but
yeah,
thanks
no
for saying
breaks.
that.
Yeah, but great job.
Thanks.
Thanks for that. I want to bring in Jack Motz, who is our East Hampton reporter. Hey, Jack.
Hello, Joe.
So, big news this week in East Hampton. We had the Democratic primary on Tuesday night, and that was the primary for East Hampton Town Supervisor. And because of the nature of East Hampton Town politics, this is essentially the race for supervisor. It sets up the fall ballot, but there is no Republican challenger in very heavily Democratic town. What ended up happening in this election?
Yeah, so as you said, it's about a 3-to-1 disparity, Democrats to Republican in East Hampton, a little less than that. So this was a Democratic primary, and Kathy Burke Gonzalez ended up beating Jerry Larson. She had 2,054 votes per the Suffolk County Board of Elections unofficial results. And Jerry had 1,245. There was one write-in vote, so it was 3,300 total votes, which is a lot for a
Mhm.
primary election, right? I mean, that's almost a third of the Democrats in East Hampton Town. So the spotlight had been on this race for some time. A lot of people, a lot of stories were written about it. A lot of people had eyes on it. So I think that the only person who is more excited for this to be over and for this to be in the rear view is Kathy herself, and
Yeah.
her family. It's been a long 6, 7, 8 months or so.
So we wrote about this that in an editorial that this was really a fork in the road for the Democratic Party in East Hampton Town. Kathy Burke Gonzalez was the incumbent supervisor, but she also sort of represented the Democratic Party uh, coming in, the establishment of the party. And Jerry Larson, who is the East Hampton Village Mayor, was running a challenge, and he was running sort of from outside and sort of trying to more or less take over that committee because he ran a bunch of committee members in the primary as well to try and take some of those district seats. How did that turn out?
Yeah, so as you said, there's 19 election districts in town, so 38 committee members because there's two each. He put up a separate slate of 38 against the 38 that were running with the Democrats. There was one person who was kind of cross-endorsed who supported Larson in the end. That was Francis Bach. And so this is really like to determine who's going to be controlling the party and who's going to be running, in future town elections, right? So there's no bearing here. But Jerry ended up winning 9 seats, again, per those unofficial results. I think there were 2 districts where both of his people beat the two sitting or people that were endorsed by the sitting Democratic committee. Those one of those was District 5, which is mine, which is where I live. And in that district, Lisa Larson, Jerry's wife, and Chris Minardi, his deputy mayor, appear to have beaten Joe Gonzalez, Kathy's wife,
Mm,
and Allison Felenius. So both of them appear to have gotten a seat on the committee. What ends up happening there? He's got 9 seats now. It's still kind of up in the air, right? There'll be another election for supervisor in 2 years, so you could say that he's playing the long game here, which is probably a good read. Or those seats kind of end up falling by the wayside. We'll see. We'll see how that ends up shaping up. There was a couple of pretty key races there, right? This election was involving a lot of people in town. The allegiances were pretty strict, right? So in Amagansett, the sitting chairwoman, finished first in her district. That's Anna Skrenta. She had 115 votes. And then in that district as well, Vicky Littman, who was backed by Jerry, seems to have finished second. So there was a couple districts that were like that had, one person from the committee make it through, and one person from Larson's camp make it through, which I think, if it came down to it, I think that's kind of what many would have expected, right? The majority of them go to Kathy or the sitting committee. But then, a handful kind of slipped through, people who are well known in their districts, like Lisa Larson presumably is. I think that's kind of what many would have expected to have happened. Because it's 38 people, so that's a lot of candidates, or 38 seats on the committee, so that's a lot of candidates. So I think that was kind of expected.
So Jerry Larson lost his race, but did make some inroads as far as getting some of these committee seats. So this may not be the end of this story. There could be some impact for the East Hampton Town Democratic Committee down the line.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, he was kind of talking. You hear a lot in town, just people wanting, I guess, fresh faces on this committee. And I think that that's kind of what he was going for. Some people might say that it's a little bit more cynical than that. I think we kind of editorialized about that, right? In our, sort of pre-election editorial. Right. So, it's going to be interesting to see how this ends up playing out down the line.
Yeah.
Again, supervisor race in 2 years. That's kind of what I think we would be looking at. But yeah, so, Kathy's won for now. She was very relieved on Tuesday night. I was at Rowdy Hall with her camp, and, it's fun to be with the winners. It's a long night, but, it was good. And it was kind of funky because in a lot of those situations, most people would kind of have their eyes on the TV to be glued to the supervisor race, right? But a lot of the people that were there were sitting committee members who were looking at their own race.
Sure.
And I also mentioned that Larson is kind of bringing fresh faces to this committee, or that's what he said. It's worth mentioning that there are other people that were endorsed by the Democrats who, weren't incumbent, who were, running for a seat on the committee for the first time. One of those people is Adam Hornbuckle, who seems to have he was up by 2 votes, right? A lot of these margins were very, very slim. But he was up by 2 votes in his district. He's, his day job is the Long Island director for Schumer's office. So he would be a fresh face on the committee. He was not incumbent. So yeah, it's it's good to have this in the rear view. It was a very exciting election to cover. And it was a late night on Tuesday, so it's
Big happenings for East Hampton Town, no question about it. We'll keep an eye on it
no
going
doubt.
forward then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jack.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm Joe Shaw. This is 27 Speaks Behind the Headlines. I want to bring in Dan Stark. Hey, Dan.
Hiya, Joe.
So, Dan, we had an election in Southampton Village that was a fairly significant one this time. How did it turn out?
So there were 2 things on the ballot here. First, let's talk about the referendum where voters were asked if they supported or wanted to expand the terms of office for the mayor and trustees from 2 years to 4 years. And the answer to that was a resounding no. 367 people voted yes compared to 623 voting no. This is a roughly 26% margin of victory. So voters clearly said, we support the current system of 2-year terms and having elections every year. This is something that has been talked about before. In the fall of 2023 during Bill Manger's first year as mayor. They tried to expand the terms via a resolution that would have been subject to a permissive referendum. However, there was enough opposition where residents said, we don't want this, and the board tabled it. This time around, the board said, we're going to go directly to the people here. And this was the hot topic in election season in Southampton Village this year. In the debate that the Express News Group hosted, I think we spent about a half hour talking about term expansion and then potential term limits if the referendum passed. Now that 2 years the 2-year terms are here to stay. It'll be very interesting to see if the term limit discussion continues. There was a public hearing on it at the June 11th meeting of the Board of Trustees that they kept open till the July 9th meeting. So we'll see where discussions resume there. So in some ways, things have stayed the same, but there is also the race for 2 seats on the village board here, and I think these results are pretty significant. So what happened in that race, incumbent trustee Ed Simeone led the way with 631 votes to win re-election to a second term, and newcomer Willa Bernstein, a former member of the village's planning board and a lawyer, won her first term on the board with 529 votes, and in doing so, essentially ousted incumbent Deputy Mayor Len Zananti, who came in third place with 401 votes, and then former trustee Gina Aresta, who was running a joint campaign with Len Zananti to return to the board after a 4-year tenure, finished in fourth place with 366 votes.
And Simeone and Bernstein weren't really running together exactly, but they both ran on this idea of transparency, more transparency from village government. I can assume that means things, the voters that resounded with voters to a degree.
Absolutely. Both Simeone and Bernstein were the two candidates in this race also who said that they were against expanding the terms of office there. Zananti and Aresta were in favor of it. And I think that the strong results of the referendum there certainly played into the election result that we saw. And yes, Simeone and Bernstein, they ran separate campaigns, but they campaigned on a lot of similar themes of transparency and open government. Now,
Mhm.
with Bernstein joining the board, this is a pretty significant shakeup here because for the first time under Bill Manger, he's objectively looks like that he will be in the minority on the board. He's had majorities in his 3 years so far. When he took office as mayor, he pretty much had a 5-0 board. In 2024, Ed Simeone was elected to his first term, and we saw a 4-1 dynamic. Over the last year, there's kind of been a 3-2 split since Rob Coburn joined the board. Now with Bernstein joining, who, again, in her campaign, preached very similar ideas to Ed Simeone, as of now, it looks like there could be this emerging new majority of Simeone, Coburn, and Bernstein. So it's a huge shift for this board, and I'm very interested to see how this is all gonna play out.
Yeah, going to be a really interesting story moving forward. Thanks for covering it, Dan. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So let's go to our silver linings piece for the week, and we bring in features editor Michelle Trauring. Hey, Michelle.
Hey, Joe.
Such a fun story. Tell us the story that came out of the Evelyn Alexander Wildlife Center in Hampton Bays this week.
Yeah, it is a fun story, and it's also kind of a sad story. It's sad, it's bittersweet, it's happy, it makes you cry. There's a lot going on. But basically, the wildlife center got a call from a distressed homeowner saying that there was a fawn in their backyard, a baby deer, that didn't have use of its hind legs. So presumably this baby had been hit by a car and kind of made its way into the backyard. So the wildlife center employees came over, they kind of assessed the situation, brought the baby deer back to the center, and they decided that the most humane thing to do would be to put the deer down. So fast forward to the next morning, the homeowner calls to check in, see what happened. They were delivered, this really grim news. And they said, the doe, the mama deer, is walking around the backyard and is really
Mm.
confused and seems kind of lost, and is crying out for her baby.
Oh,
So, yeah. So the hospital supervisor, her name is Jessica Chiarello, she got an idea. A couple days earlier, the center had brought in a different baby deer, one that had been seen wandering around alone a really busy roadway in Southampton. This is very unusual behavior for a baby deer. Typically, the mother is close by, they're very protective over their babies. It's odd that this fawn would be by itself. So a good Samaritan scooped up the baby, brought it into the center. And so this baby was looking for a mom, and this mom was looking for a baby. So Jessica took the fawn and brought her to the doe in the backyard just to see what would happen. And the first attempts were not successful. The baby had zoomies. The mom was confused. She was kind of like, "You're not my baby. What is going on here? Who are you?" And they kind of largely ignored each other. So around 6 o'clock p.m. that night, Jessica said, this baby's hungry. This mom is disinterested. I have to bring the baby back to the center and maybe we'll try again. So she scoops up the baby, plops her back in the car. And as she's leaving, she sees the doe kind of on the side of the road eating some oak leaves. And her udders were like really swollen. And like clearly she had a lot of milk she needed to express. This baby is starving. And so Jess is like, I'm going to give it one more try. Like, this is the perfect situation. So she takes the baby, plops her outside the car again, kind of gently guides her to the doe. And sure enough, the fawn latched and the doe started grooming her. And that is like the sign that this is working. And so now they're happily together.
It's
New
such a
mother, new
sweet story.
baby. Yeah.
Yeah, just such a sweet story. And it sort of underscores all the great work they do over there at the Evelyn Alexander Wildlife Center. Thank you for telling that story. I thought it was just a pleasure this week to be able to report that. Really, really fun, nice story.
For me too.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So that's it for this week's edition of 27 Speaks Behind the Headlines. Thank you to Dan Stark, Jack Motz, Cailin Riley, and Michelle Trauring. I'm Joe Shaw. We will see you again next week.